Thanks so much to Francis for the great introduction to the topic of IUU fishing. As Peter said, I will be dealing with the drivers of IUU fishing, and these are many and varied. Of course, it's going to differ from region to region, country to country. But when we think about drivers, I mean, the value of analyzing this is, of course, that we then know where to focus our efforts in addressing IUU fishing if we can identify the main drivers of IUU fishing in our countries and regions. So I'm not going to try and be exhaustive about this. Of course, there's a lot of potential drivers. I'm just going to go over kind of the main issues. You can see the list here, and at the end, I'll ask you if there's anything that you think I've missed. So let's start with one of the biggest drivers of IUU, and that of course is money. And a lot of the time, particularly in the industrial fisheries, this is the main driver of IUU. And when a fishing operator is thinking about whether it will be profitable to engage in IUU, they are going to do something of a calculation, right? A kind of cost-benefit calculation. So they're going to think, are the expected benefits from illegal fishing going to outweigh the expected benefits from legal fishing? Can I get more from illegal fishing than legal fishing, right? What are the consequences of me fishing illegally? And that's the kind of calculation that you will be making. So, on the one hand, expected benefits from illegal fishing could be that I can catch more because, you know, I'm not bound by a quota. Maybe I can get more money, right? Because maybe I can target species that are protected but very valuable. Maybe I can catch more and therefore sell more. And also maybe I can reduce the cost of my fishing. As Professor Francis mentioned, a lot of the time what we see in illegal fisheries, obviously, are they're cutting costs. So you're not paying for licenses, you're not paying for fees, maybe you're also not paying your crew. There's a connection, obviously, between forced labor and illegal fishing. So that's the expected potential benefits. And on the other hand, you're going to think about the potential costs. So you're going to think, what are the penalties going to be if I get caught? Am I going to be fined? Am I going to have my catch confiscated? Am I going to be banned from fishing? All of these elements could happen. You know, am I going to have to pay something to avoid being caught? Maybe I have to bribe someone. Maybe I need to transship my catch, right? All of this also comes with cost implications. Also, I'm going to think about whether I'm going to be caught. What is the probability that I'm going to actually be detected in my IUU and actually have to pay these penalties? And then finally, what is going to happen to me if I get caught in terms of my moral and social standing in society? Is there a big taboo on illegal fishing? You know, is the community going to look down on me? Am I going to lose access to, you know, my fishers or whoever, you know, who might be assisting me in my fishing operations? So I'm going to think of all of these factors and I'm going to make a decision about whether I should engage in illegal fishing. So the economic drivers are often extremely important, and a lot of these other drivers are related in the sense that they affect one of these elements in the cost-benefit calculation. One of these is the issue of inadequate sanctions, right? So we talked about the fines, the potential penalties. In this particular case, it also comes from Samela. It was our very first catfish workshop, actually. He presented this table. And what you can see in this table is 4 different fisheries. 4 different illegal fishers, I should say, who have been caught fishing particular types of fish. In the first line there, you can see that they were fishing for Patagonian toothfish, yeah? Everyone knows what this is. It's a very valuable fish. You can get a lot of money from this. And they were caught by Australia, you can see there. And the expected benefit that they were going to get from this fishery, from selling this fish, was $500,000. However, Australia leveled a penalty on there of $87,000. And so that penalty, together with the cost of the fishing operations, was, you can see there, the total cost, $526,000. So you can see in this case, the fine did have a deterrent effect, because it made it less profitable to fish. It increased the cost. The cost was more than the benefit because of the fine. What about these other fisheries? What do you see here? What about this other one that was caught by Japan, this crab fishery? The benefit, $38,000. The fine, $1,400. And so the total cost was $31,000. We're still making a profit there, right? Even with the fine. You'll see that? Yeah. So what is this fine doing? Is it actually deterring this illegal crab fishing at all? Probably not. Yeah, it just is a cost of doing business. So what happens here is that because you have inadequate sanctions, because the laws are not really sufficient to deter IUU fishing, you can have the best enforcement in the world, you can catch all the illegal crab fishers, but it doesn't really matter because they're just going to say, here's your fine, thanks, I'm going to go back to doing the exact same thing. Yeah? So this is just an example of how inadequate sanctions, outdated laws that don't provide for sufficient penalties for IUU fishing can drive IUU fishing. Then, of course, we have distant water fishing, and I don't need to tell you that distant water fishing, of course, is a big culprit when it comes to IUU, particularly in this region of West Africa. So you probably can't see this table too well, but in 2015, Dahir Belhabib and her colleagues did a study on illegal fishing in West Africa by EU fleets and Chinese fleets. What they found was that even though, as it was, the amount that was being paid for access to those fisheries was extremely low, less than the value of what the fish was worth, when you factored in the illegal fishing as well, it was just a fraction of what the fish was worth. So here, of course, the West African states were massively losing out. Related to this is the issue of fishery subsidies. Distant water fleets are very much funded by fishery subsidies, right? Most of them would not be sustainable without these subsidies. And because, of course, we see distant water fleets often engaging in IUU, fishery subsidies are sort of directly funding IUU in that sense. Fishery subsidies also increase fishing capacity, they increase overfishing. Not all of them. We're going to discuss more about subsidies on Friday. Not all subsidies are harmful, we should say. However, the capacity building subsidies that we see, like fuel subsidies, subsidies for modernization of vessels, building of vessels, any type of fishing input often lead to overfishing and overcapacity. They lead to depletion of fish stocks, and of course that fuels IUU fishing. There's just too many boats out there competing for too few fish. Then, of course, we have to think of the issue of capacity constraints. Now, this, of course, feeds into the probability of getting caught, right? When we're thinking back to that calculation that we're making. Capacity constraints obviously affect the ability of countries to catch IUU offenders. And it is not just happening in EEZs, of course, this is also happening on the high seas. The high seas are very difficult to regulate and patrol. There's generally a lack of assets and people for enforcement worldwide, even in developed countries. And RFMOs obviously are covering these sort of high seas areas, but there's variability in their performance, right? Not all RFMOs are successful in deterring IUU. Often we have insufficient data as well. So technological advances, of course, can help with monitoring, but at the moment it's quite difficult for them to help with enforcement. You still need people to go out and board the boats and actually, issue the fines and arrest people, whatever you need to do. As I said previously, one of the big problems as well is when you're missing strong, up-to-date laws and regulations. And a part of this as well is also having judges and legal practitioners who are trained to deal with these cases, because sometimes environmental crime is, not really seen as a major problem And so we don't necessarily have legal practitioners who are trained to deal with those particular types of cases. And often it might just be an administrative sanction, which is not really a sufficient deterrent. Then we also, of course, have the problem of flags of convenience. And, this is what I was talking about yesterday, about failures in flag state control. Now, the big problem, of course, is that if you are a country that is putting in good laws, that is creating strong enforcement mechanisms, that is controlling the fisheries on your fisheries in your fleet that are flagged to your country, then those fishing vessels, if they don't like that, can just go and reflag somewhere else. And we do have countries that have open registers that lack adequate monitoring, control, and surveillance capacity, have lax laws and regulations on IUU fishing, on safety, on environmental pollution, and so on. And these flags are attracting unscrupulous operators. And as Francis was saying earlier on, with this case of the FV Viking, there always seems to be a home for the worst IUU offenders somewhere in the world. Now, up until now, we've really been talking a lot about the industrial fisheries, right? Drivers of IUU fishing in industrial fisheries. But, as Professor Francis mentioned, we also, of course, have drivers of IUU fishing and illegal fishing in small-scale fisheries. And this is something which is quite a nuanced, quite a complex problem. One of the drivers in the sector is food and livelihood insecurity, and this is often a vicious cycle or a vicious spiral. That we have a certain amount of IUU fishing going on, maybe by the small-scale fleet, maybe by the industrial fleet. This leads to depletion of fish stocks. That leads to food and livelihood insecurity, which in turn can drive more IUU fishing, and round we go. The other aspect of this is that as we see fish stocks deplete, we start to take more and more stringent management measures. And that, again, has the effect of, reducing the ability for fishers to catch fish. So we might declare marine protected areas or, take precautionary approaches to our management. That just means less stocks for fishers to fish. So the combination, sometimes, of IUU fishing and the management measures to address IUU fishing can exacerbate food and livelihood insecurity, and this can lead to negative coping behaviors, such as IUU fishing, such as pulling children out of school, such as taking short-term high-interest loans. Now, food and livelihood insecurity is not the only driver of IUU fishing in the small-scale sector. There's also issues like difficulties reporting, maybe they're unregulated, things like this. But this is really a primary driver, I think, of at least illegal fishing in many small-scale fisheries. We also have the issue of organized crime. So obviously Ife is the expert on this, and she'll be talking about this a bit more, I think, next week. But in terms of, just a quick overview, does anyone know what this is? Abalone, yes, exactly. So abalone is a delicacy in Asia, right? It's also found all along the South African coast. And because it's such a high-value resource, what is happening is that gangs have started to essentially organize to poach this abalone and export it to Asian countries. And they will recruit, local fishers, local people to go and poach it, sell it to them, and so on. This is a picture of a big abalone bust in a warehouse by police. On the other hand, of course, we've also seen instances where IUU fishing can lead to maritime crime. Quite a few people have linked the rampant overfishing, illegal fishing, and dumping of toxic waste along the Somalian coast with the rise of piracy in that area. So what about West Africa? I'm sure you have your own examples of this. I'm sure Ife will talk more about this, perhaps also the same issues with the rise of piracy from IUU. Does anyone have any pertinent examples they want to share that they could think of? In your countries, anything related to organized crime and IUU? Yes, at the back.
Merci beaucoup, professeur. En fait, je voudrais peut-être rebondir sur un aspect que vous avez annoncé, c'est-à-dire, je disais que je voudrais rebondir sur un aspect que vous avez annoncé, c'est-à-dire la pêche iranienne au niveau de la pêche artisanale, au niveau de la pêche à petite échelle. Au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest aussi.
Sorry, does someone mind translating for me because my headphones were not working? Does someone mind quickly just translating? Because this was not working very well. Yeah. All right, sorry, if we can ask you to repeat it.
Oui, si je comprends bien la question, je voudrais peut-être souligner un aspect aussi qui est fréquent au niveau des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, c'est la pêche artisanale au niveau de la pêche iranienne au niveau de la pêche artisanale. Actuellement, on a tendance à considérer que la pêche iranienne c'est uniquement effectuée par des bateaux, mais voilà, parce que les réunions, les ONG, tout le monde s'active pour lutter contre la pêche iranienne, mais la cible c'est les bateaux. Donc quand on sort la grande artillerie, on considère que c'est les bateaux. Mais dans les pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest que je maîtrise le plus, la pêche artisanale représente 70 à 80% des captures. Et je pense que c'est une pêche artisanale, mais disons qui est industrielle. Pourquoi? Parce que les pêcheurs artisans, ils ne pêchent pas pour la consommation domestique. En général, il y a quelqu'un qui est derrière, une personne X, je ne vais pas nommer la nationalité, qui les préfinance et ces gens-là pêchent illégalement de façon frauduleuse et du coup, c'est des pêcheurs agréés à ces gens et du coup, donc toute la pêche est industrielle finalement. La pêche artisanale est industrielle, la pêche industrielle est industrielle. Donc finalement, où se trouve la pêche artisanale d'autrefois, traditionnelle? Voilà, c'est ce que je voulais vraiment souligner. Donc vraiment, ça recoupe votre thèse. Merci beaucoup.
Yep, thanks so much for that clarification. And yeah, certainly in certain countries, Senegal, Ghana, the artisanal fleets obviously are almost at the point of approaching sort of small commercial fleets. So yeah, there's definitely some overlap in the small scale and the industrial in that case. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that insight. I think that's very pertinent. Okay. Okay, great. So let's talk about the next driver, which is of course governance problems. So at the end of the day, there's not much we can do if there's no political will, if there's mismanagement, if there's corruption, in the fishing industry, in as a whole, in the fisheries governance system as a whole. And so that can end up being quite a big driver, which, allows IUU practices to happen, let's say, or illegal practices to happen. Fishing access money, of course, is also another issue because it does mean that, often governments might have a vested interest in keeping that money coming in, which may influence their decisions when it comes to the fishing industry, and it may mean that they continue to allow a certain amount of illegal fishing by those distant water fleets because, of course, the access money is very valuable to the country. There's also the issue of fishery subsidies. I put this up here because fishery subsidies, once you started to provide them to the fishing industry, they're very difficult to claw back because the industry then becomes dependent on them. There's also issues, of course, just a lack of knowledge of, the various aspects of IUU and a lack of political will, as I mentioned. And I kind of like this graph because it shows that, they did a survey of global leaders and showed, the sort of ranking of the sustainable development goals, which of the sustainable development goals were the top priorities of leaders. And we see right at the bottom, life below water doesn't seem to be a huge priority for leaders. Of course, fishing is cutting across some of these other goals as well, so, fishing obviously also affects the goal on poverty and so on, food and all these types of things, but nevertheless, when it comes to life below water, there isn't so much political will. And then finally, just to quickly highlight this issue of coordination, obviously we heard a lot from the regional fisheries bodies yesterday and the work that they are doing, but this is kind of sort of an obvious driver because, you have different countries in a region that have different capabilities, technology, people, patrol assets are going to be different. Obviously, it's very difficult for some of these countries, all of these countries, to address IUU fishing alone or, cover this regional fishing fleet alone that's fishing in their waters and their neighbors' waters. But obviously, when you are able to pool resources and avoid duplication, it makes it a lot easier to control the regional fishing fleet if you work with your neighbors, basically. And just as a quick case study, the Pacific Islands has been particularly good at this. They've been doing this for decades, cooperating to control their tuna stocks. And they have seen great success. They've done quantification studies showing that between 2016 and 2021, the amount of IUU fishing in the tuna stocks dropped dramatically. From what I hear yesterday from the RFBs, it seems like, West Africa is starting to move in a similar direction, implementing a lot of the same procedures and practices. So that's very encouraging. All right, so now I want to hear from you. We're going to do a little word cloud exercise. So I'd like you all to get out get out your phones now, and you can either scan the QR code or put in the URL and put in the password, and you can just tell me which of these drivers or any other drivers you can think of are most prevalent in your country. So think about that. You can input, I think, 3 to 5 answers, and then we'll just see what we come up with in the word cloud. Okay, I already see a few coming up there. Profit is a big one. Profit and economics. Okay, I also see subsidies there. Yeah, I think that is an issue, definitely in some countries in the region. Okay, but it looks like a lot of it is economics, profit, corruption, also food security, a lot of it, yeah, I'm sure, particularly in the small-scale fleets, there's a lot of those here as well. All right, just one more minute. Okay, some kind of interesting answers coming up there. Fish meal factories, I assume that's about, the need to supply those factories. Sorry, I can't read all the French, I can only guess. Yeah, okay, but I see a lot of it is about economics and money, which is, kind of expected, and also about corruption. Which, yes, does make a lot of sense.
Kathleen?
Yeah.
Just one. Ok, en français et en anglais, en fait, on voit aussi écrit. On voit écrit de façon très différente et variable le problème en fait, du manque de capacité pour être la capacité en fait, des États à contrôler ce qui se passe, c'est-à-dire les forces de police, les forces on le voit régulièrement ça aussi venir.
Okay, thanks so much for the translation. I appreciate it. All right, I don't want to take up any more time because I know Peter wants to move on. But yeah, that's very interesting, and thank you all for your inputs. I think it's definitely worth discussing as we go through the day, and thinking about the fact that these are really the main drivers: the economics, the corruption, the lack of capacity, and thinking about how to address those in your countries to address IUU. All right, thank you so much, everybody.